I'm going to be talking about 10 perfumery tips I've acquired over the past few years of doing perfumery. I am not the best, but after a few years you learn some things and you make some good habits. I would say number 1 through 3 are essential for perfumery. If you want to do perfumery, you probably have to follow these, otherwise you're going to be wasting time or materials. So number 1 is organize. You have to be organized in perfumery, especially if you have like 100 or 200 materials. Things can get pretty messy. Some problems that I had in the past were I rebought some materials that I didn't need, or I thought I had enough of a material and I didn't, so I had to wait for a material to come in before I could make a batch of fragrance. The best way to keep organized is to write all of your new materials in a spreadsheet. The things you want to put in your spreadsheet are how much of it you have, if you have any dilutions, where you're putting it, and where you're getting it from. So if you like the material, you can repurchase it from the same place. And then dilution's really useful if you aren't sure if you have a dilution or not, or if you're not sure where it is, or if you're not sure if you have enough, then check the spreadsheet. It's really useful. I have gone to it maybe once a month just to see where a material I have is. Number 2, naturals in the fridge. Naturals, just like any other organic material like food, will eventually go bad. It's best to keep your naturals in the fridge so they stay fresher longer. And you don't have to put a fragrance in the fridge. Fragrances have antioxidants in it, so they're not going to go bad, even though there's an expiration date on it. That's just there because they don't want to get sued. So your fragrances aren't going to go bad, but your naturals might. So put them in the fridge. I also heard you should put aldehydes in the fridge, which I do, and I have no issues. They're kind of in there with my food. I'd say naturals, put in the fridge. Aldehydes, if it doesn't bother you, you can put those in the fridge. But I'm not really sure if aldehydes are going to go bad. I guess they will eventually, but is the fridge going to help? I'm not sure. It just makes me feel better. Number 3, label everything. So if you have a material bottle that has a dilution or something in it, make sure it's labeled. Make sure you put how much that dilution is. If you have samples, make sure you label what the sample is. So like name it, put on the label, and then also put the version number on it as well, 1 through however many versions you need. This makes it really easy to tell what you're doing. Sometimes I didn't label some things, and I was trying to figure out how to recreate it because I kind of liked it. I couldn't find it. I retried all of the formulas I thought it might be, and it wasn't. So make sure you're labeling things. Number 4, keep every formula and every formula version. So if you write down your formula on a piece of paper, save that piece of paper. If you put it on the computer, save it. And if you ever want to update that fragrance, don't overwrite the previous formula. Make versions, make a history of what you're doing, and I'll help you in the future, especially if you change something drastically and you kind of want to go back. Definitely having the version is good. This has helped me in the past because I've made some pretty drastic changes to a formula and it got much worse. And I wanted to go back and see what I did before and kind of like think about, okay, these materials that I put in are probably good and these aren't, and then the new materials I put in, these probably are bad and these are probably good, and that helps you make the next version. It's good to also look back and like see what you were doing, maybe learn from it, make sure you're not repeating yourself, and also if you ever wanted to make that fragrance again in the future, or maybe a specific version for whatever reason, you have it, just in case. If you want to put your formula on the computer, I would say probably in a spreadsheet and then have one column for every version. I usually have like a column on the left of the material and then the version at the top and then how much of that material I'm putting in. Number 5, and I think this is a good one, watch Perfumery YouTube. Some of the YouTubers that I've watched in the past that I think are the most helpful is probably Aaron Terrence Hughes. And I like his videos because he says what he thinks is in the fragrance. I don't know if he's always 100% correct. For the most part, I think he's usually correct. And I think the materials he's talking about are important ones in the fragrance. And he talks about how they smell, how he'll use them, how other perfumers use them. And I've learned a lot about fragrance materials from watching his videos. Some of the materials that he talks about in his videos, I'll like go and purchase immediately. He gives a really good description on those materials, and in my mind, I'm like, can I use this material? Is this something that I want? Is this something I don't have? And that's also really helpful. Another helpful YouTuber is Sam Macer. He is another perfumer. I say Aaron Terrence Hughes and Sam Macer are probably like neck and neck in the YouTube perfumery genre for me. They're both very talented. I like their videos a lot. And Sam, he talks a little bit more about creating fragrances. He's more like tutorial based. Aaron Terrence Hughes is more review based. So Sam is going to tell you about a lot of different materials, some of which I've also purchased. He'll tell you how to use them. He'll tell you how to make accords. He's also a good resource on YouTube. I want to give an honorable mention to another perfumer YouTuber that I've watched recently. His name is Ryan Parfums, and he's awesome. He talks about GCMS reports. He'll go through a GCMS report. He'll tell you everything that's in the GCMS report, or some things that you can replace, and how to make the fragrance, which is kind of cool. I think it's pretty useful to see how other fragrances are made, so you can kind of apply that knowledge to figuring out your own formulas. Number 6, fixatives and additives. So I say fixatives in perfumery is kind of fake, and I think a lot of people agree with that. A fixative, the idea of a fixative in perfumery is you put something in your fragrance that top or mid notes will bond to and last longer. And that doesn't really make sense. If you put in a top note that lasts 15 minutes in a fragrance, it's going to last 15 minutes no matter what. If you put in, let's say, orange oil that lasts 15 minutes, and then some of this, glucom P20, I think that's how you say it. This is a very viscous, very thick liquid. This is supposed to kind of give the illusion of citruses lasting longer. So maybe if you put in orange oil with this in the correct dosage, with orange oil at the correct dosage, it might last, or it might seem to last, another 30 minutes or something. I think they advertise 2 hours, but who knows if that's true or not. Another fixative trick that I do, and I've talked about this before in other videos, is using natural top notes that might not last long and then put in similar materials that last longer in the mid or base, like bergamot. Bergamot doesn't last a whole long time. It lasts longer than orange oil, but you can put in a bergamot base that lasts longer, like bergamot 104. And that stuff's awesome. That stuff will last probably like 4 to 6 hours. It's a mid note, but it lasts a long time. You can put it in your natural bergamot and then that stuff in the mid. It just kind of makes it seem like the citrus is lasting a long time, which is nice. I've never done this before, but in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking if I ever have like a cherry top note, I put in raspberry ketone to make that like that red fruit kind of like dry down, just to kind of like give the illusion that the cherry is going to last long, because a cherry accord is not really going to last very long in a fragrance. Depending on what you use, if you make it more natural, it's probably not going to last long. Some material stores will have like fixatives for sale, like they'll have like citrus fixatives or wood fixatives. They're probably just base notes that kind of smell citrusy or smell woody, and they last a long time. There's also like the idea of using solids as fixatives, which I'm not sure if that works or not, but they last a long time. So if you want a long-lasting fragrance, put in solids. And additives. So what is an additive? I kind of just made this up. I thought it sounded good. With fixatives, the materials I'm talking about are not things that smell in the fragrance, but things that kind of are necessary in a fragrance. So BHT being one of them, that is the antioxidant that you put in your fragrance so it doesn't go bad. There's also UV blockers in fragrances, some fragrances. This is not essential. I would say BHT is essential. You have to put BHT in your fragrance to make it safe. Also, I think IFRA states that if you use a certain amount of a material, you have to put in 1% or 0.01%, something like that, of BHT so that your fragrance remains safe to wear. But regardless, just put BHT in your fragrance at 0.01%, I believe, to prevent it from going bad. And then you don't have to put your fragrance in the fridge. And then there's UV blockers, which are not essential. They don't really affect the smell of the fragrance too much, although some of them do have a smell. They are there to, just kind of block UV rays from the sun if you have a clear bottle, and you don't want the color to be damaged or the naturals in your fragrance to be damaged. You could put in a UV blocker. It's not essential. There's a lot of fragrances that turn brown just from the naturals kind of aging, and that's normal. It's kind of like fine wine. When a fragrance gets darker. I have some cheap fragrances that have done this before. This fragrance, Spice and Black Vanilla from Cremo. Good fragrance, kind of smells like Spice Bomb. It's kind of, turning a little brown. It's aging quite well. It smells the same to me. And this is probably what it looked like when I got it, just clear. UV blockers, if you want your fragrance to remain clear, you don't want it to look like this, then you can put it in, but it's not really doing anything, I'd say. Number 7, don't be afraid of floral materials. So if you're a perfumer and for some reason you hate floral notes, I'm not a huge fan of florals either. Although after starting Perfumery, I do like jasmine, I do like rose, I do like those as like in the background, just supporting the fragrance. But You do need floral notes in a fragrance. I'd say this is probably required, although I haven't experimented enough without floral notes to see if it's possible to make a finished fragrance without floral notes. I would say right now, I believe you do need floral notes to make a finished fragrance. Not just like rose or jasmine. You don't have to put in like floral accords into your fragrance. I think it's important to put in floral notes to kind of support the fragrance and make it brighter. So the floral materials I'm thinking of are lily of the valley materials, dihydromercenol, linalool. These are all materials that if you see on a website will have like a floral in the odor description. So don't be afraid of those. Don't be afraid of floral odor descriptions. It's just kind of hard to place your nose on some of these materials like dihydromercenol. People say it smells like lavender. It doesn't really smell like lavender to me. To me, it actually smells like bleach. It's just very bright and sharp, kind of annoying. But if you dose it correctly, you put a little bit in your fragrance, it's going to brighten it up. And the base isn't going to smell so muddy. So things like linalool, dihydromercenol, floral, coronal, those are, I'd say, pretty important in a fragrance. Use one of them, use some of them, experiment with those, see what you like. And, you never know. You might have a fragrance that you kind of like the brightness of after you add one of those in. Number 8, don't be afraid of solids. A lot of people don't like to work with solids because they're hard to work with, and that is true, but like I said earlier in the video, solids can help your fragrance last longer, and there's a ton of solids, and a lot of them smell really good, so you should use solids. Sometimes it's easy when a solid is powder form, like vanillin. Vanilla, it says crystals. It's not really crystals. It's a powder. Sometimes you get crystals and you kind of have to like crush them into a powder and then put them in alcohol. And sometimes heat them up just to make them dissolve. Vanillin, it's really easy to use. Just dilute it in alcohol. But if you have something like benzoin resinoid, which is a resin, it's kind of hard to use. You can kind of do the Dairy Queen thing where the resin's not going to go to the bottom. It's not going to fall out. This stuff's really thick. I would say for this one, I have to microwave water for like 30 seconds in a little cup. Place it in there, and then it'll be heated up enough to, stick a pipette in there, pull out one drop. Don't fill up the pipette with this because you'll be wasting a lot. Just one drop, and then you can kind of like squeeze it out and then like wipe off the pipette in the bottle that you're using. Weighing this stuff out is going to be really difficult. If you ever need to weigh out resinoid or any solid material like this, weigh this out first, and then you can remove some of the material if you need to or add more, and then you're not picking it out of other materials that you've already placed in. And whenever I make a big batch, I always start with the solids. Solids, don't be afraid of them. They're not that bad. Just, heat is your friend. Number 9, smell, designer, and niche fragrances. If you are in a city or around a city, then you can go to the mall or to fragrance stores if you have them in the city and smell niche fragrances or designer fragrances, even if you don't have any. I think if you're making fragrances, it's important to smell other fragrances. You want to compare yourself to designer and niche fragrances, and I don't think it's hard to get there. If you're just starting out as a perfumer and you're wondering how can you make fragrances like that, it's not that hard. There's a lot of bad fragrances out there, and you only need a little bit of experimentation and research to kind of get there. I'd say perfumery is a very abstract form of art. Just because you think you might have made something bad doesn't mean that it is bad, doesn't mean that other people would think it's bad. I probably made things just starting out that I thought smelled terrible that other people probably would have liked. If you're watching perfumery YouTube, if you're doing research, if you're experimenting, if you're doing it every day, eventually you will get there. I think it's very easy to get to even the niche level quality of materials because the materials you're using are probably better than designers. Designer fragrances are using cheaper materials and they're kind of driving up the price, and they use them very well. But if you're using a lot of naturals, if you're using some expensive materials, then your fragrance is niche. It is just as niche as the other fragrances. Now, there are things you can't use and those are captives, like Isogamma Super and all these other captives that we would love to use, but we can't. But it doesn't mean that your fragrances can't be just as good as niche fragrances. I'd say indie perfumery is niche. Just because we're not paying a perfumer, we're not giving some of the cost to advertising and people making the fragrances and stuff like that. We're making the fragrances, we're creating the formula. I'd say indie perfumery is niche. Number 10, exposure fragrances. I think it's important to show off your work with people. Get feedback, see if they like it. And also, don't only show your fragrances to friends and family, because they might not tell you the truth, although my family and I think my friends that I've shown have been pretty truthful. Some of them just straight up not liked a fragrance and they mentioned it, which is really good to hear, because I know they're not lying. If they say that fragrance to them smells good, then you know they actually do like it. Also talk to, acquaintances, people that will probably not lie to you, and talk to different people about it. Talk to old people, talk to young people, see if they like it. I have a fragrance that I showed my friends and family and coworkers and absolutely no one liked it. And I was really surprised because I really liked this fragrance. And I changed it up maybe a little bit to be what I thought was a good medium between the thing that I would like the most and the thing that other people would like the most. I did realize it was pretty abrasive. Made it a little bit less abrasive, but I was happy with it. And I brought it to a market. And it was one of the most popular fragrances I sold. But the issue that I had was I was showing it to a bunch of people my age, and they didn't like it. But when I went to the market, a lot of old people were there, and they loved it. So just me and the old people loving this fragrance. So it's really, really good to, expose your fragrance, get some feedback on it, see if people like it, and then also, give gifts. I have a few fragrances that my mom has liked, so I gifted them to her on Christmas and her birthday, which is really nice. I like making gifts more than buying gifts. That's pretty much it. There's a lot more tips in perfumery. It's huge. Like, there's so much about it. I could talk about pipettes or materials to buy or bottles to buy, but I think those are the top 10 tips that I can give you. I think a lot of perfumers would probably talk about like how you should actually make your fragrances. I think a lot of perfumers feel very adamant about that, but I don't think that stuff's important. I think the most important thing is that you are making the fragrance, and it doesn't matter how you make it as long as you make it. I definitely don't make fragrances the way that everyone else does, and I have finished fragrances nonetheless. Extra bonus tip number 11, have fun with it. Don't do it if you are struggling to make something that you really like, but you're not making it and you absolutely hate it. It's kind of hard to keep a hobby going if you don't like it, and I think it's probably not healthy to try and chase something you don't like. If you're constantly thinking about a fragrance you want to make and you're struggling with it, but you're still thinking about it, keep it up. Eventually, you'll get there. That's pretty much it. Hopefully, those tips help you out. I know some of these I could have used when I was starting out. Thanks for watching.